Once there was a family of three who came to India from abroad to live on a hillside property near a small village. Husband's name was Tim, wife Susan, and they had a dog named Max. The mansion they had come to live in was massive and centuries old. This mansion stood right in between acres of farmland and plantations, most of which looked overgrown and uncared for. Along with the mansion, the property also had quarters for servants and butlers and a barn. All of it was now empty and falling apart. Although Baxter Mansion looked exquisite, it was very old and had cracks on walls and ceilings and needed renovation. The owner of this property, Dan, a successful businessman in his early 40s, was also from abroad. He had inherited this property from an unknown distant relative who died of old age. Dan had given the renovation contract to Tim, who was well known for his expertise. Tim and his wife Susan loved traveling to different places with Max, and they enjoyed living in old houses and mansions, learning its history while turning worn-out old houses into stunning, beautiful homes. The village, which was closest to this property, had very few residents, mostly farmers and local shop owners. Tim and his family had to take a taxi from the airport and travel for hours before they got to this picturesque village. They were mesmerized to see how beautiful the village was, but didn't last long. After they entered the gates of Baxter Mansion, they were spooked to see abandoned and overgrown landscape. It took them a while to reach the mansion itself from the gate. They were greeted by a couple from the village, Dira, the male caretaker, and his wife Shanti, who was hired as a cook. They had made a room for themselves at the quarters. Tim and his wife found this couple very uneasy and restless, like they didn't want to be there. However, all of them entered the mansion through the massive front door, which was all rusty. But Max stayed still outside, and he kept growling and looking at the front door as though there was something that only he could see. Susan tried a lot to get Max indoors, but the dog stayed put and would not go inside no matter what. Susan finally gave up and she went inside the mansion. The mansion looked very creepy inside. It looked old, dull and worn out. Wall paint was coming off at many places. They could see the tiles were chipped off here and there, and also there was a very strange smell. The caretaker, Dira, told Tim that they too had arrived that morning an hour before Tim's arrival, so they hadn't had enough time to get anything done in the house, except they had kept a room ready for Tim and Susan, and the food was ready too. 2 days had passed, and Max, who was still refusing to go indoors, had made himself comfortable outside. Tim went around exploring the house, planning the changes that needed to be done, and Susan, along with Max, went outdoors exploring the woods. Strange things started happening around the house. Tim and Susan would often wake up in the middle of the night hearing Max bark and growl as though he was being attacked. They would wake up shivering as the temperature in their room would go severely low, whereas the temperature outside would be normal. They would find windows wide open, which were shut before they went to bed. Even during daylight, Susan would find things missing or in a different place as though they were moved from their original spot. While Tim ignored these incidents and carried on casually, Susan was very concerned. She went looking for answers, but she found no logical explanation, which made her angry and restless. Towards the end of the first week, she had started growing paler and weaker. Max, who was still outdoors, had stopped eating, and he too was growing weak. Shanti, the cook, who had been witnessing all this, found a chance to speak to Susan alone when Tim and her husband Dira stepped out of the house to go to the village market. She told Susan that the old man who lived on that property before them was very strange and was rumored to practice black magic. She said that some days they would see a sudden change in the weather and would hear loud shrieking noises. All the people who worked for the old man, his butlers and other helpers, one day just stopped working for him and they were never to be seen again. People from the village refused to enter this property, and over the years, the whole place fell apart. No one from the village knows what exactly happened to this old man or how he died. She told Susan that she and her husband were also reluctant to come work in this mansion, but because they were going through a very bad financial crisis, they had no choice but to take up the jobs. Susan had grown even more weaker and paler, and Tim was also looking very disturbed. Dina and Shanti, who were very concerned, told the couple to leave the property as it was sucking the life out of them. One night, when they were seated for dinner, the light started flickering, and then suddenly it all went dark. They heard Max howl very loudly, and then it was all silent. Tim got up to get the torch. By then the lights came back on, but Max was gone. Tim and Dira went looking for Max outside, but he was nowhere to be found. It was as though he had vanished. Things had gotten way worse, and Tim and Susan were looking lifeless. Shanti could not take it anymore, so she forced her husband to run to the village and fetch the village shaman. They were not even sure if shaman could do anything, but at this point they were desperate to try anything. Dira returned after an hour along with the shaman. The shaman, who was about to step inside the house, paused and took a step back. It was as though he could see something. He closed his eyes and he started chanting while holding prayer beads in his hand. In the other hand, he was carrying holy water which he sprinkled before entering the house. Inside, he met Susan and Tim and he asked them to pack their bags and leave immediately. But they refused, saying they hadn't found Max yet and they could not leave without him. It was almost afternoon. Shaman told Tim and Susan that their lives were in danger and they should not stay there any longer. He also told them that Max was still alive and was somewhere around the property. The shaman said that they have to leave the house before sunset, as the negative energy in the mansion was growing stronger, and now that shaman was also there, the presence would do its best to harm the residents and keep them there forever. Shaman, along with Dira, made arrangements for a cleansing ritual, and Tim went out looking for Max for one last time. Susan had started packing and Shanti was helping her gather their things. Shaman started the cleansing ritual in a hurry as they were running out of time. Dira helped Shanti and Susan step outside the house along with their bags. Tim was not back yet. Suddenly there was an overcast and the sky grew darker and the wind got stronger. The air inside the house got heavier and smellier. Susan, Shanti and Dira were now standing outside, heard terrible screams coming from inside the house. They were very concerned about the shaman. They just stood there not knowing what to do next. This is when they saw Tim carrying Max in his arms and running towards them. Susan was glad that Max was still alive. Suddenly there was a bright light, like a lightning bolt, so bright that they all had to shut their eyes. When Tim and Susan opened their eyes, they found themselves standing in front of the mansion, exactly like the very first day when they had arrived. The mansion looked very normal like the very first day. Dira and Shanti greeted them like they're meeting them for the first time. And Max was standing right next to them, very healthy, still staring at the house, growling at something. At that very moment, they both knew that they had had a vision, the exact same vision, which was impossible. They knew for sure that something was terribly wrong with that place, and they decided to turn back and take the next flight back home rather than going ahead with the project. Of course, they explained everything to Dira and Shanti and offered them money too. Dira and Shanti were glad that they didn't have to stay there and work because they too were having weird dreams. This story was shared by an amazing person who I met recently when I traveled. During our conversation, I happened to tell her about our channel and the stories we share. So she recalled this story which her house help Reena told her. And Reena is the granddaughter of Adira and Shanti. The mansion was demolished as no one was willing to go there for the renovation project. Every person or family who took up the contract and went to live in that mansion faced horrific incidents and left within days of their arrival. That whole property is now abandoned and is a part of a jungle that grows there. We hope you enjoyed watching this episode. If you have a story to tell and if you want us to share your story, true stories about paranormal activities, strange incidents, real encounters, please drop in a note to this email address. We will do our best to turn your story into a video and share it with the world. Thank you so much for watching and for your continued support. Have an amazing day and stay safe.